I am a lifelong big fan of the DC universe and its many, many characters. And recently I was thinking, I'd like to do a list, like a top something, top 5, 10, I don't know, list of comics that I really enjoyed in what used to be my golden age of reading. I'm really enjoying reading comics now, but like in the last few years, my favorite era was before the New 52, before Flashpoint. And I was thinking of making a list of my favorites from that period, and then I thought, I think I did this already. I went back and found 11 years ago on episode 306 of what was at that time called the Spirit Blade Underground podcast, now the Christian Geek Central podcast. 11 years ago, I made a list of my top 20 comics or storylines pre-New 52, and I thought, oh, that'd be fun to revisit that, see if I feel the same way. And I listened to it, and I thought, you know what? I don't know that I would change. I might describe my interest in love and appreciation in different terms, but this list I don't think would change very much, if at all. So I thought, okay, well, let me just throw some visuals up in the video version of this so that you guys can see a little bit of the artwork. All but one of the items on this list are available to read through the DC Universe Infinite subscription. So I figured, hey, since this pretty much represents my thoughts today, and I'm a little bit pressed for time this week, how about I just share these thoughts with you guys again, or for most of you for the first time. So here is my top 20 comics or storylines before DC's New 52. I hope you enjoy. Well, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you may know that I have been less than pleased with the reboot of the DC Comics universe. As with the New 52 event, I've really not been happy with a lot of things going on there, and have, in fact, for the time being, dropped my comic book collecting, at least DC Comics. I'm kind of dipping into other things as I feel like it, just mainly trade paperbacks and stuff like that. And yeah, so now I'm basically, at this point, just looking back at the things that were going on in the DC universe before that point, really between the mid '80s up through, I want to say, 2000. Well, like what, 2011, 2012? Is that 2012? I think is when the New 52 happened. And what things I liked about that era. I mean, with the Crisis on Infinite Earths, that was the biggest reboot of the DC Universe continuity that had ever happened. I mean, there really had been no reboot to my knowledge up until that point. And then they would do soft reboots every 5 and 10 years after that. But then the New 52 was really a really pretty jarring and fundamental reboot of the universe, despite it being not a complete reboot like I think it should have been. They did some jarring things with the characters of Superman and other characters, and it's just, anyway, I won't get into all that. Instead, I want to right now celebrate the era that came before that, what I'm calling DC pre-52, and which is basically Crisis on Infinite Earths up through the New 52 event, or the Flashpoint storyline. So my top 20 stories or series during that time period. I didn't write this out and kind of collect my thoughts, in written form, so it's going to be a little bit more, actually a lot more off the cuff. If I think of it, maybe I'll, or if you guys bug me enough that you tell me that you're interested, I will make a written post of this, or at least that gives the title. So if you want to reference it, you can go back. But for now, all you're getting it is just this audio delivery version of it. I'm just going to go through this list of 20. I basically went through all my comic books, looked at all the stories, and reminded myself of what they were about, and all the ones on my top 20. I mean, there was very little kind of thinking that I had to do before the stories just jumped back into my mind and reminded me, oh man, yeah, that's why I love this. And so I just put them all down into like these little kind of like index cards, and then little by little through a crazy system figured out which ones were ranked where. So top 20, here we go. Number 20, series or storyline. Well, I'm going to start with Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was, I don't know that this story is really going to hold up today, but if you're interested in that era of DC Comics, I think this is the place to start. I remember when I was getting into comic books, I got this encyclopedia of superheroes that gave me bios and all this kind of stuff on these different characters, and it kept referring to this big event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, because so much changed about so many characters during that big event. And I was like, I have got to hunt this down at some point. So years later, when I was in high school, and then after that, when I had more money and stuff, I made sure to go out and get this and just kind of start exploring the DC Universe seriously, starting at that point in their publishing history. And this is a huge story about all these universes being destroyed, because basically DC Comics had bought up all these properties from failing comic book publishers, and they just migrated those characters over to the DC Universe. And to explain how suddenly Blue Beetle, who was once in a totally separate universe from Superman, is interacting with Superman, they'd say, he's from a parallel dimension, another world, and he's able to jump over and visit Superman every now and then. Well, they bought up several properties this way, and eventually they had all these different universes to keep track of. It was getting confusing to readers. They wanted to have one single continuity that readers could keep track of easily, and so they created this character called the Anti-Monitor, which is a really lousy name when I kind of step back and look at it afresh. But I mean, as a comic book fan for so many years, that name comes with so much weight and significance to it, because this guy was devouring universes until only one remained, and all the surviving heroes kind of had to migrate to that one continuity, as it were. So anyway, it's a crazy story. It's like tons and tons of DC characters, probably more DC characters in that story than anyone before or since. It was a 12-issue maxi series published over the course of a year, and I think if you're interested in getting into like DC history and stuff like that, and just familiarizing yourself with some of the characters of the DC's past, that is definitely a great place to start. It'll be confusing because you'll be reading and you'll be like, I don't know who these people are. But Jeff Johns said, who's a very popular writer in comic books in DC specifically, and is managing their entertainment brand in other mediums right now. He said that's what he started with, and he was like, I don't know who any of these characters are, but man, this is amazing. And it was the start of his journey of discovery, because he looked, and this is how I was too, in many cases. I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but I want to find out. I don't care who that guy is. Oh, I don't know who this guy is, but I want to find out. It was just a great starting point to figure out what I wanted to explore next in the DC universe. Okay, I'm not going to spend that much time talking about all these, but anyway. So that was number 20. Number 19, A Superman for All Seasons. And this is a kind of not exactly a retelling of Superman's origins, but more of his upbringing, his early history in Smallville. And it was just kind of a great reminder of who Superman is. If you want to know if you want a comparison of what I think was great about Superman pre-52 and what's wrong with Superman in the new 52, the comparison couldn't be more jarring when you look at the first few issues of Action Comics and then read A Superman for All Seasons. In A Superman for All Seasons, he is good and he's noble. He's trying to do the right thing. He's meek. He's humble. And in the New 52, he's arrogant. He's angry. He's just not Superman. He's a Superman that would frighten children. And by contrast, there's a great scene, a great exchange between Superman and a small boy in A Superman for All Seasons that just reminds you, all these other superheroes, they got all these dysfunctional things going on inside them, and their moral compass is all screwed up from time to time. But this guy, he might not always know the answers, but he always he's always aiming for the right thing, and he's doing it with humility and great stuff. A Superman for All Seasons, number 19. Number 18, Green Lantern Emerald Dawn. The coloring might age this book a bit. I don't think the pencils do. The pencils still look great on this book. This is the origin story of Hal Jordan, and I still don't think it's been surpassed even by Jeff Johns' retelling of the origin story just a few years ago in Green Lantern comics. This is just a great introduction to the entire Green Lantern Corps mythos, and a great introduction, I think, to Hal Jordan. A lot of cool stuff going on there. Number 17, Arkham Asylum by Grant Morrison. And this was one of my first exposures to Grant Morrison, and man, Batman basically has to break or enter Arkham Asylum, which has been taken over by the inmates, and he has to rescue the people that are working there. And it's a crazy, creepy exploration of the psychology of these characters in Batman's rogues gallery. And I think it was one of the first stories that really made the Joker creepy to me. The art is in this kind of like oil painting kind of style, and it's kind of abstract and weird, but still very interesting and cool to look at. And the writing is just like, oh, the Joker is like disturbing to me in this, not like in this like. I want to say offensive way, like let's just, go take him as far as we can just for the sake of doing that, and just being excessive. He was just kind of like, ugh, he is a disgusting, disgusting character. Yeah. Okay, so that was number 17. Number 16, 52. 52. Now, this story took place... when was this? Was this after Final Crisis or just before it? I think it was leading up to Final Crisis. And this is a story about, just kind of like the second and third and fourth tier characters of the DC universe. It's also kind of a mystery. It came out on a weekly basis, and they have never since been able to pull off writing storytelling on a weekly basis of this caliber. I mean, even monthly books don't have storytelling of this caliber in most cases. It was just great stuff, a great introduction to the nooks and crannies and all the neglected characters of the DC universe. A great read, and both from a character standpoint and from a let me try and figure out where this is headed storytelling standpoint. Number 15, the Sinestro Corps War. This is a Green Lantern story about Sinestro, his ultimate villain, who has the yellow ring that can kind of do the same things but is powered by fear, and he's kind of building his own Yellow Lantern Corps, except they call it the Sinestro Corps. And this is cool even just for fans, I think, of the DC Universe, because Jeff Johns, who wrote this, pulled in some villains, some surprise villains. Like, if you've not read it, I don't want to give anything away, but he pulled in some great surprise villains that became a part of the Sinestro Corps, and it made Sinestro, just solidified him as a very scary villain and a very imposing force to have to reckon with. And it kicked the crap out of the Green Lantern Corps. It was really, intense stuff. And Jeff Johns, he's just great with both character-driven stuff and also reminding you why reading books about people flying around in spandex doing superpowered things is really fun and really cool. So good stuff there. Number 14, Superman, Batman. And this is not, of course, the new 52 reboot of this, but the original one, I want to say by Jeff Loeb. Is that how you pronounce it? But anyway, what was great about this was that the storytelling device he used was to have thought bubbles for each character, one for Superman, one for Batman, and they were color-coded, so you could tell easily who was thinking what. And as they're, going around and fighting crime and solving mysteries or whatever it is that they're doing, there's this parallel examination of what they're thinking about the situation in front of them and what they're thinking about the other person. So you've got Superman, saying, Bruce scares me sometimes. He took that interrogation a little bit too far. And then, right next to that, in Batman's thought bubble, you got something like, that Boy Scout's probably worried that I was taking things too far or whatever, and so it's this great kind of contrasting of the two characters, what makes them tick. And it's just a lot of fun, character-driven stuff, but also really cool superhero-y stuff. It reminds you why we like Superman and why we like Batman, because they contrast with each other so well. It also helps emphasize who each of them are and why we love them so much. Great stuff, especially the early stuff that's specifically by Jeff Loeb before he left the book, Superman, Batman. Number 13, JLA, Grant Morrison's JLA, which started I want to say in the 90s, and it was like the first time in, I want to say decades, that they brought the Big Seven back to the Justice League and made them the core members. So you had Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Flash, Martian Manhunter, and Aquaman. Those were who they called the Big Seven. The biggest, most well-known characters in the DC universe. They finally brought them all back together and made the book just amazing. They were taking on, each month the biggest threats, universe-shattering stuff going on in that book. And what the first story especially, I think, was just knocked it out of the park because it established how Batman could stand side by side with these other, like, small g gods, with these crazy levels of power, and not only hold his own, but actually do better than those other characters, So, I mean, even if you're just a Batman fan, that's one of the best Batman stories, if not my favorite Batman story, that first story arc in Grant Morrison's JLA. But I think his whole run on that was really just a lot of fun, really cool, just like big, huge, epic scale superhero stuff that, is the stuff that you can and should expect from a Justice League story. Great stuff. And much better than so many of the terrible things he did after that. Oh, Grant, what happened? All right, so now number 12, Infinite Crisis. Now, this was a sequel, I think 20 years after, I think 20 years after the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it was actually brought back some characters that had last been seen at the end of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It brought them back, and it was a great kind of response to how dark superhero stories had gotten, because the Superman from the Crisis on Infinite Earths continuity, who was like the 1950s, very traditionally minded Superman, that lived in a much more simplistic time, simplistic world, or at least that's how media presents the 50s. He's looking at the modern age of superheroes from afar and saying, this has gone horribly, horribly wrong. They've forgotten how to be heroes. We have to teach them how to be heroes again. And so he ends up coming back, and I won't give away kind of some other things that go on, but there's some great interactions that go on. It's a look at heroism and what makes someone a hero, and and how good intentions can go horribly wrong, and it's just a great, very enjoyable story, and of course lots of great superhero action. It's written by Jeff Johns, so it's got, for me, that great blend of character-driven storytelling with great action and just a reminder of why we like superheroes and what makes them so iconic and what makes us all love superheroes in today's day and age, why we want heroes. All right, number 11, Batman Year One. This is the definitive Batman origin story, so much so that Chris Nolan and company pulled from this story when they created the Batman Begins. And it's you'll notice that if you've not both seen that movie and read this book, then after you read this book, you're gonna see that. And it's Batman when he's still learning the ropes and he's not at his peak, either physically or in terms of his wisdom in how he approaches crime fighting. But I think even more than that, this is a great Jim Gordon story, a Commissioner Gordon story, before he's the commissioner. I don't think before this point anything had been done with Jim Gordon to make him a really relatable character, and I mean, you could almost call this Jim Gordon Year One. It's a great story and establishes that relationship between Batman and Commissioner Gordon that would continue for years and years, and established just so many great things with that relationship that they took further after that point. Number 10, Batman: The Long Halloween. This takes place about 1 or 2 years after the events of Batman Year One. It's an early continuity Batman story, although it was published many, many years, later. And but it's just kind of like a flashback, early Batman story, and it talks about some of his first encounters with various members of his rogues gallery, and you see the origin of Two-Face in that story. And so if you like the classic Batman rogues gallery and want to see great treatments of all those characters, this is a great read. And not only that, but each month as he's going up against a different member of his rogues gallery, all these stories, I think it's like 10, 12 issues, something like that, they all connect together. They're part of one grand mystery that Batman is trying to solve that, man, it totally kicked my butt. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm good at predicting mysteries to begin with, but this was a great mystery, such that when I came to the big reveal at the end, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, it wasn't obvious, but the clues were all there, and it makes sense, and I could have arrived at that if I would have been smart enough. So I think it was a really well constructed mystery in that regard, and great storytelling, great stuff. Same creative team also that did a Superman for All Seasons. Actually, this story came first, and then later they did a Superman for All Seasons. So it's just kind of, again, one of those stories that reminds you of who Batman is and why he is the way he is and what makes him cool and what makes his universe and his rogues galleries cool. So a great story. Number 9, Secret Six. Now this took place, I believe, after the events of 52, or maybe concurrent with those with that storyline. But this is basically about some villains that are kind of on the run, and it's Gail Simone. And I want to say even more so than Jeff Johns. She knows how to do these great character-driven stories, but she also goes to these really dark places, and the villains, when she writes a villain, they are sick and twisted and jacked up. I mean, seriously jacked up. Such that you're like, oh my gosh, they didn't just say that. Wow, I gotta take a shower. But not in a way that's like offensive. It's just like, oh my gosh, I can't even describe it. Just the way that she has her villains talk. It's really, I mean, they are nasty, nasty, nasty. And I guess in a book about villains that are going up against even worse villains, you gotta kind of, bump that factor up a bit. So great stuff. And this is a bunch of Z-list villain characters that she made me really think were cool and made me care about them. I mean, Gail Simone, I've said this before, I think, on the show, she can frickin' write the phone book and make it a character-driven, compelling drama. And, and there's, of course, great comic book action and all that kind of stuff, but really, really great read. Number 8, Teen Titans. This is Jeff Johns. It's one of the first things he wrote that I read. And before I read this, I was like, I'm not interested in sidekicks. I'm not interested in kid superheroes. I just could not possibly care less. I don't want it. But after I'd read maybe one thing else that he did, oh yeah, I'm going to come to that thing later in my list. But when I had been introduced to something else he'd done, I'm like, oh man, I want to read more by this Jeff Johns guy. I read Teen Titans, and I loved this book, and I loved what he did with these characters. I loved the vulnerability he allowed them to have because they were kids, and actually having them get hurt in some instances, and bad things happen to them. And he's just got a gift for taking characters that I could easily overlook and make them cool. Really, really good stuff. Number 7, Hero, as in Dial H4, but this series was just called Hero. It's based on an earlier concept from comic book history where there's this little dial from another planet that looks like a phone dial, beep-bop, 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 and that this kid Robbie Reed finds, and if he dials the word hero on it, it'll transform him into a random hero, not an existing hero, but like a hero that's created and designed and thought up by the device on the spot that just happens to have the superpowers that are needed for the situation at hand. And, as you can imagine, that was kind of like this, fun, happy-go-lucky, kind of silly, very innocent kind of concept from DC Comics past. And obviously that kind of fell out of favor with what readers were interested in reading about. But they resurrected it years later, keeping those original stories in continuity, but basically saying, okay, at some point this dial fell out of Robbie Reed's hands, and it just kind of stumbled and eventually found its way into somebody else's hands, someone that had no interest in being a hero. So what this series is about, and it ran for about 13 issues and then was canceled, but the storyteller was able to tell the story that he wanted to tell all throughout those like 13 some issues. And so it actually feels like kind of a maxi series or a mini series or something like that. I've read it multiple times. It's a great read with a great sense of completion and conclusion at the end. But basically, it poses the question, what would a real Joe Schmo person off the street do with superpowers if they suddenly had them? And then it asks that question every issue, but with a different kind of person, a person with different moral qualities and moral standards, a person who's in different stages of life, different economic standing and social standing in life. It's just this great exploration of human nature, and in of course this great packaging of crazy superpowers and stuff, and how things can go awry. And so anyway, great stuff. Number 6, The Killing Joke. This is another Batman story. I was almost going to say in this story blank happened, because it's like the big event that everyone that's read it would remember, but I don't dare spoil it because then it won't be as shocking when it happens. But this is I think the definitive Joker story. This shows just how twisted the Joker is, how scary he is, how dangerous he is, and also it explores some of the unusual relationship between Batman and the Joker. So I'd highly recommend. It's written by Alan Moore of Watchmen and so many other very notable works of the comic book industry. So if you haven't read The Killing Joke, I'd highly recommend checking it out. I mean, we're getting now to up to the top 5-ish right now. These are like books that they're just fantastic stuff that I really, really enjoyed. Number 5, The Flash. And I would put this at Mark Waid's run on The Flash up through Jeff Johns' run on The Flash. What Mark Waid did is took Wally West, who started out as the sidekick to the original Flash, Barry Allen. But when Barry Allen died, during an earlier story from something on my list, but I won't spoil it in case you go read it, then suddenly Wally West kind of inherited that role. And to my knowledge, that was the first time that had been done in comic books, that a sidekick had actually inherited finally the role of their predecessor. And so, but Wally West, he was never really as fast as Barry Allen, and so he was kind of like the lesser Flash who was wearing the same costume but not as fast and cool as, I think they were trying to ground it in reality a little bit more. So they took away a lot of his speed, and he really for a while couldn't run faster than the speed of sound. Lame. But what Mark Waid did was broke through that, increased his power, and also did it with a storyline that had Flash exploring where his power comes from, where the power of all speedsters comes from, and came up with the idea of the Speed Force and what a Flash could really do, or a speedster could really do with super speed, aside from just running fast. And he found all these creative ways to apply the concept of super speed, resulting in a Flash that, you would definitely not say, oh, that's the guy that runs fast. You'd say, no, frickin' that's the guy who can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, da, 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 da. I mean, it's crazy the creative ways he found to manipulate speed, to manipulate momentum and inertia, and just crazy stuff. Really cool. And also some great character-driven stuff, because as Wally is exploring all these powers and realizing how powerful he is, at some points he's questioning his humanity, and he's like, am I even human? What is happening to me? So some great character moments there too. Really good stuff. And then there was some time, I think there was a dip as Mark, in Mark Waid's storytelling. But not long after that dip, Jeff Johns came in and took over, and it did, take him a little bit while to hit his stride for me, maybe about 10 issues, but after that I was like, crap, Jeff Johns, man, he's doing it again. This is some great stuff. Number 5, The Flash. Number 4, Green Lantern Rebirth. Now this was, again, written by Jeff Johns. This was just an interesting feat of storytelling, because for years, Hal Jordan, he went bad, and then he sacrificed himself to save the Earth, so he died, and then he came back as the Spectre. And during all this time, there was no Green Lantern Corps. There was just Kyle Rayner as the only Green Lantern. And so there was this kind of mess of continuity. And then there was like Guy Gardner, who used to be a Green Lantern during the Green Lantern Corps Hal Jordan classic era. But then when the Corps was destroyed and it was just Kyle, he ended up finding out that, I guess I'm half alien. I didn't know that, And so here, Jeff Johns had this mess of continuity to resolve, and his end goal was, okay, I'm going to bring Hal Jordan back, I'm going to bring the Green Lantern Corps back, and I'm gonna clean up all this mess of continuity and do it in a way that makes sense and that's interesting and that's fun and to read and to follow. And that, just from a writing standpoint, to figure out that mess and to give purpose to it all, he did some retroactive continuity fixes or changes, and some people may not like that. I personally think that's really interesting when you don't
ignore or say, hey, this didn't happen in the past, but you say, hey, this happened in the past, we all read this, but here's what was really going on, so you acknowledge it, but you give a new spin to it. I actually find that really interesting. And so anyway, this was, on top of all that, it's a reminder, a refresher of what makes the Green Lantern Corps cool, what makes a Green Lantern cool, what makes these characters cool. And, Jeff Johns would say, oh, I was just bringing Hal back to who he always was. But frankly, I read Hal Jordan's stories of the past, and his character was never as fleshed out as I think it must have been in the mind of the young Jeff Johns as he was reading those comics, because the Hal Jordan that he brought back was much more interesting in many respects than the Hal Jordan that had come before that, especially the Hal Jordan prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths and the Green Lantern Emerald Dawn kind of a reboot or reestablishing of his origin story. So really, really good stuff. Lots of great character-driven action. Love it. Number three, we're getting really close now. JSA. Now, this was a follow-up to JLA. They saw, I think, the value in doing a big team book with these big iconic characters, and these were all characters from the World War II era of DC Comics publishing. So, like the classic Green Lantern and Flash, the Flash who had the silver bowl and the wings on his, on it that he wore on his head, and all these World War II versions of characters, and some characters that never got remade for the newer era of superheroes, and so they're all like somewhat aged. I mean, there's reasons in all kinds of continuity stuff that they're not completely aged to what they should be, if they were adults in the World War II era, but they're all kind of in maybe their 50s or 60s or something like that, physically speaking, and so we got this chance to be reminded of why they were cool and why having experience is cool and why having wisdom is cool. That whole sense of like the older generation teaching the younger generation, which has now been completely lost in the New 52. I mean, geez, Ma and Pa Kent are dead, and all these characters from the World War II era, they've all been reimagined as young punk versions of themselves. And so, like, there's no older generation of superheroes that came before Superman in the New 52. And, man, you just miss that. There was so much great sense of legacy, so much great sense of family, of history, man, just a lot of great character stuff, and also just great crazy superhero stuff. I'm talking about this now, and I think I got to stop recording this so I can go and read JSA right now. This was great stuff. All right, but I got to soldier on. I got two more stories and series to talk about. These were great. Number 2, The Spectre, John Ostrander and Tom Mandrake. For the longest time, I would say this was my favorite series of my favorite story of all time. This series, I've still got it on my wall. Let me check how many issues. 62 issues. It lasted 62 issues. And this series was not canceled. I thought it was. I thought for sure it was, because 62, and I was like, this is kind of a weird story. It wasn't like super selling, but it wasn't canceled either. The writing team, the creative team basically said, we're ready. We've told the story we want to tell. We're going to end this on our own terms. And so it's a great read from beginning to end. The Spectre is the wrath of God. The Spectre, or the embodiment of the wrath of God. It is created by, I want to say, Siegel and Schuster, maybe just one of them. I don't think both of them were involved in the creation of the Spectre, but one of the same guys that created Superman created the Spectre before he created Superman. And the Spectre at the time was not the first superhero, because he was this weird supernatural kind of, almost kind of pulpish kind of character. And basically in the 1930s, a slain cop is then given the chance to come back to life and avenge his own death if he is willing to take on the responsibility and the mantle of becoming the embodiment of the wrath of God. And so after that point, he is, carrying out horrible executions of horrible people, who are murderers and rapists and, all these kind of, and, they're just kind of getting their just desserts, or at least, at what the reader feels, that kind of like cathartic kind of just desserts. I mean, who am I to say what a person really deserves, but it's that kind of, that sense of catharsis where you're like, yes, the bad guy's getting his due, And what was interesting with this run is that it really drew heavily, most heavily, from the Bible, from the Old Testament, also from the New Testament, but especially from the Old Testament. But it validated much of biblical teaching about who God is. Now, don't get me wrong, you're going to read this, and there is some flaky, weird stuff in there that shows up. Relativism rears its ugly head as every once in a while there are other religious beliefs that are kind of validated and stuff like that, but the so you just kind of have to overlook those and say, okay, well, that character's smoking crack, or I can kind of I can come up with reasons in my own mind why how I can make it work, because predominantly the type of God that's being validated is the God of the Bible, and a God who does exercise wrath, or who will exercise wrath. And there's just great moral dilemmas, as you would imagine when you think about a person taking on this role, like a human who themselves is not really at all worthy of judging anybody else, but yet they're kind of given this job to kind of at least be along for the ride and to kind of make some of the decisions. It's a weird kind of like I almost want to say like host and parasite relationship between the Jim Corrigan and the entity that is the Spectre, which requires a human host in order to operate properly. So it's really just and the artwork, don't even get me started on the artwork. It's inky and black and dark and murky and atmospheric and moody, and it's in some ways reminds me of a Tim Burton film, but not in any way in that whimsical fashion that Tim Burton's darkness can be kind of whimsical at the same time. Not at all that. It's, oh man, just the style of this. Fascinating stuff. A reminder that, justice is an important virtue. There must be justice. And you know what? There must be wrath. If God is good, then there must be wrath. And their evil has to be quarantined and it has to be punished. Otherwise, how can we say at all that a loving and just and a good God exists? And and then of course all the moral dilemmas and stuff. Just a fascinating read, both from the standpoint of of just supernatural storytelling and superhero storytelling. And finally, number one, which just dethroned, actually, I should say, the Spectre as of this kind of evaluation of the stories that I've really enjoyed. For the longest time, I was like, the Spectre is just my default response whenever somebody says, what's your favorite comic book series? My favorite comic book character has always been Green Lantern, since I first saw him on the Super Friends. But as far as like a comic book series, the Spectre absolutely would be my default response. But I didn't take into consideration this little gem of a miniseries, and that's Identity Crisis. This is what started the kind of road to Infinite Crisis, and just some of just like maybe I want to say 5 years of really great stuff at DC Comics. It feels like it all started with this story. Basically, man, I want to be careful not to spoil it. It's very well written. The author's name is, I want to say, Brian Meltzer. I think it's Metzler. I don't have it in front of me, but he was already a respected novelist before he came on board and did this project. But this thing just elevated, I think, comic books as a whole in a way that they hadn't been before. It brought just real human drama to comic books in a way that I've never seen or read before. And I do include C because the art, and I'm not as good at remembering artists, so I apologize, I don't remember the name of the artist. But the art in this was such a huge part of the storytelling as well. There is pain and there is loss in this story. But it's not this, this mopey, slow-paced drama. There is crazy cool superhero action going on and just iconic superhero moments. But in the middle of all that is this quiet character drama, just beautifully told. I can't remember a story in all of my comic book reading that has affected me emotionally to the degree that this one did. Twice during this story, and I want to say it's like only 4 to 6 issues long, but twice in this story, I was crying, like tears streaming down my face, crying as I read this story. There's just some wonderful stuff. Maybe part of that is because I'm a long DC Comics fan, and so I know, it's kind of like, when I watch some Batman the Animated Series episodes now, and there's of that first 1 or 2 seasons where they'll allude to things about the tragic nature of Batman's past and his life. They'll allude to things because they can't really go into them full bore because it's, it was designed in large part for kids, but they'll allude to things that on a deeper level, an adult, and specifically an adult fan of DC Comics, will connect the dots and bring the weight of their understanding of the tragedy of Bruce Wayne's life to that moment that they're creating. And I think maybe there was some of that similar things going on because I just had an appreciation for the history and what these characters have been through in the past and what that means for what they're experiencing now, and it gives more weight and impact to it. But honestly, I recommended this book and Green Lantern Rebirth to someone who was a middle-aged woman. It was back when I was on staff as the worship pastor at our church, and it was my administrative assistant. She knew that I was a big fan of comics, and she was like, "Well, recommend something to me, and I'd like to try and understand this, and understand what you love about these things." And so I recommended 2 stories to her: Green Lantern Rebirth and this one. And this one I recommended first, and she was very moved by it. I don't think to the degree that I was, but she said, "Wow, that was just a wonderful story, wonderful storytelling." It's just, I don't care if you're a comic book fan or not. This is good art. This is good storytelling. It's just great content. And boy, can I say this without spoiling anything? Okay, let me put it this way. It acknowledges the history of DC Comics and the villains of the universe being at sometimes ridiculous and innocent and not very threatening, but just kind of ridiculous. Like you got frickin' Captain Boomerang and these other characters that have these really weird names and gimmicks that are just whimsical and stupid and not threatening at all. Like the Toyman and stuff like that. And it provides a reasoning for why they were ridiculous and non-threatening and just not very scary. And then in the wake of explaining why villains used to be like that, the fallout from that is that all the villains in the DC universe after this story became much more menacing and threatening and scary. And, they would do things that would make their on the surface whimsical appearing themes and names, they would make them seem like ironically sinister. To give you an example, and this isn't something that really happened, but doing this kind of thing, this kind of retroactive adjustment of continuity without canceling and saying this stuff didn't happen. Somebody said that the next thing they'll do with a villain is they'll like Jeff Johns or somebody will take a villain called the Kite, who just flew kites and he used kites to fight superheroes. How ridiculous is that? I don't even know if that's a real person, but this is a real story. And this creative type said, next thing you know, Jeff Johns is going to take the character of the Kite and say that, his name actually comes from this ancient pagan religion where they would strip off the skins of people and stitch them together and make kites out of them so their souls could fly to heaven, and he'll make that guy come and be sick and twisted and scary, and that's what they did. They repurposed the themes of these villains in light of this story. And so the DC universe, the villains of the DC universe became much more sinister and much more threatening. And so I suppose if you're not a fan of that kind of storytelling and those kinds of villains, then maybe this story marks the beginning of a bad time in comic book reading for you. I can think of one, maybe two of you guys in the community that I think would probably say that. But for me, someone that really likes heavy, dark, intense drama and storytelling and really threatening bad guys, this was an amazing catalyst for the DC universe. But even setting that aside, even setting aside the wonderful things that it brought about for the DC universe, this story in and of itself, marvelous storytelling, wonderful, heavy, impacting human drama, and all centered around characters that I love. I cannot think of a better comic book story pre-52, or post-52, obviously, than Identity Crisis.
Okay, that's it. Like I said, I don't know if my list would change very much. Maybe I'd move some things around. I don't know if anything would be different maybe the number one or the number two would be different. I don't know. But I mean, all of these would probably be in the same list, maybe just moved around a little bit. But I'd love to hear kind of like what your favorites are from that period, or if you're more of a Marvel person, what your favorite Marvel comics in all of your fandom have ever been. So anyway, you can leave me those in the comments below. Thanks. Bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.